Hello everyone and welcome to the Happy Manifesto podcast. My name is Maureen.
And I'm Henry, and today on the podcast we have Ben Clarkson, who is Finance Director at Parkinson's and was previously at Asthma and Lung UK, and he is an absolute advocate for the Happy Manifesto.
Exciting.
Yes.
I feel like this is like a test. What page was this on? You know?
Absolutely. So, Maureen, what brings you joy?
So what brings me joy? Well, we've had the Olympics and now it's the time of the Paralympics. I was going to say football and Arsenal winning the league, but no, I'm going to stick with the Paralympics, which is...
Did Arsenal win the league?
No, they're going to win the league.
Oh, they're going to win the league?
They're going to win the league. No, it's the Paralympics. It's just a pure example of inclusion and look at people's strengths and what they're able to do. So it's going to be fantastic. I love it. So what's bringing you joy, Henry?
Well, I'm about to exchange on the contracts for the new house in London.
Oh my gosh, it's happening.
It's happening. It's a mile east of our old house. We're downsizing, but I just want to go back to London.
I still don't get it. Yeah, but no, welcome back, Henry.
Welcome back indeed. Okay. So, Ben, you are now at Parkinson's UK and you were previously at Asthma and Lung UK. And you have some fabulous shirts. So people won't know it on the podcast, but you have some fabulous shirts.
I think everyone has to go onto the YouTube channel to see his shirt.
Absolutely. So tell me about how you came across the Happy Manifesto and how it made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that came before the shirts. The shirts came later, so maybe it's a sort of happy byproduct. Actually, should have an online shop for them.
Absolutely.
So it's probably about 8 years ago. I was really fortunate to have a place on something called the American Express Leadership Academy. And at the time, I was a head of finance at Macmillan Cancer Support. So I was kind of in the earlier stages of my leadership journey. And it was a fantastic opportunity to just kind of take some time out, think about kind of what I wanted to do in my career. And one of the guest contributors to that was Henry. So Henry turns up and runs a kind of what I think they call a cafe conversation.
Yeah.
I'm sitting there just listening to you talk and I'm thinking, this just really makes sense. This is what I think is how you should lead. And this is the first time someone's kind of articulated it in a way. So at the end of the session, I said, can I get your book somewhere? And Henry just opens a bag and there's kind of like copies of his book, physical copies. He goes, there you go. So I kind of read it very quickly and just, it was the first time I'd read a leadership book that made sense to me because effectively it was like speaking to my emerging kind of leadership style.
Yeah.
But it was codified with examples of where it had worked and principles that you could follow. So I started kind of back then to start to weave it into some of the things I was doing. And I was able to kind of articulate to people, well, look, actually, this stuff works because other organisations do it. I mean, it was a few years later that I started to really put it into practice. But right from that point, I was a bit of a fan. And clearly it did, unfortunately, affect my fashion sense as well.
So tell me, was there one particular thing that was like that light bulb, that switch?
I think the thing for me was partly is the theme of empowerment. So I'd had this real strong sense that to get the best out of people, you know, if you surround yourself by great people, get out of their way and give them this kind of freedom to do stuff and do what they do best, that you get better results. And that had kind of been my approach to managing people and to leading up to that point. But I think the articulation of it through the book really jumped out. And also the thing that really also jumped out was the concept of celebrating mistakes, because I'd always talk to people about, you know, I don't want a blame culture. I want a culture where people are sort of feeling open to share things, take responsibility. But this was such a different example, this kind of idea that actually it's something you can really celebrate and learn from. There's an example in the book about, I think there's a factory where something happened and it was sort of a near-miss disaster. And I remember reading that thinking, my God, like we just need the big red button from that factory to kind of get this across. And, you know, I'd been working on changing the team culture at the time and kind of it's a principle that's really stuck with me ever since, I think.
That's brilliant.
Tell us about your example with Asthma and Lung UK about celebrating mistakes.
Yeah. Well, just for a bit of context, I suppose it's probably worth saying that Asthma and Lung UK, so we were two charities that merged and then came together to form what is now Asthma and Lung UK. So that journey there, going through bringing two charities together through a pandemic as well, it's a real opportunity to kind of develop a culture. And it was sort of a couple of years into that journey that we started to try and codify that. And we made the kind of celebrating mistakes concept one of the key principles. And I think the sort of probably the best examples I could think of where we were kind of able to see this working were a couple of things we did towards the end of my time there. So, we'd used it as a principle to try and build accountability, but you never really know how these things are kind of spreading and if it's kind of common and if it's what people are doing. So in the sort of run up to last Christmas, we were getting ready for our all-staff conference. And we had a section of the day where we were going to have someone from each directorate come and talk about something that had happened in that year. So I kind of had a word with a couple of people and said, look, it'd be really great if someone stood up and said something that didn't work. There was a team I'd come across. They'd been doing some work earlier in the year. Something had happened. It hadn't gone well. And there was this sort of email exchange where people were kind of unpicking what had happened. And I just jumped in and I said, right, this is a great example of how we can learn from these things because we tried something new. It didn't work, but now we've learned loads of stuff from this and we can use it. Sort of fast forward to this all staff conference and it's like a proper proud dad moment because one of my colleagues, who was just brilliant, she stood up and gave this whole speech about what happened where they'd tried to run a billboard campaign with a really hard-hitting message. It had perhaps been a bit too hard-hitting for the councils who vetoed it, and basically it then didn't run. And the learning from that was fantastic for an organisation that was trying something a bit different, but she was willing to stand up there and share that and say, yeah, we tried something. It didn't work. We failed, but it's okay. And we also had another colleague talk up about some of the things we'd done on a CRM program we were running, which had by and large gone pretty well. But then, with these things, there are things you learn. Stood up and shared some of the learning from that in a really kind of humble way. And I was just blown away by these colleagues' ability to just be open and honest. But what really made it for me was we had an independent facilitator. He came up to me afterwards and he just said, Ben, I'm just absolutely flabbergasted by the culture that's built here. Like most organisations wouldn't be able to do this. When you get someone who's not in it day to day comes and sort of observes and sees that kind of cultural practice, you really know you're sort of tapping into something. I think that's particularly useful when you've got an organisation that's trying to change and trying to do different things.
Yeah, it sounds really good in the sense that they actually embraced that and were open to share the mistakes rather than, fall back and think, no, or something might happen or things will start pointing. So on that, can you just build on more about how you were able to then build that culture of trust within the organisation?
I think it probably goes back to the principles we kind of set from the outset. So anyone who's ever been through a merger of any sort will probably know it can be a bit of a sort of time of volatility. Yeah. And you sort of throw in the fact that you're dealing with a global pandemic at the same time. I mean, it's an interesting challenge. It's not one I'd recommend. In a strange way, it probably made quite a big difference to the culture we were building because the way we handled that started to foster some of these ideas. And because up to that point, it was more principles we were following, whether consciously or unconsciously, it then guides how you react to certain situations. So stuff did go wrong all the time. Stuff went wrong in the early days, but because the reaction to that was, actually, that's okay, because we've learned something from it and we can make it better. Because we kind of set out with you tell us what's wrong, tell us what's not working, no matter how small it might be. If it matters to you, it matters to us. You sort of encourage this kind of actually just talk out, you talk up these things as part of the culture. So instead of people feeling like they kind of had to hide things or they couldn't be open, people became much more open and sharing what was going on. And that naturally then leads itself into when something does happen, you then have an opportunity to kind of reinforce that positively by the way you react as a leader and the way you react as a manager. And that can be simple things like introducing post-implementation reviews to a project. You can imagine we were running a lot of projects. We were merging everything, systems, policies, processes. And so every time we did that, we took an opportunity to kind of evaluate what had gone well, what had gone not so well. And it was quite telling for me that we ended up quite often focusing on what hadn't gone well and the learning for it, sometimes to the extent that we forgot to do the kind of, we did a great job here as well.
I was going to extend on that. So is there an example of when it didn't go so well and then how did you deal with trying to get that culture right?
That's a great question. I think that one that someone was able to kind of stand up and talk about a conference is a really good example, because effectively the kind of immediate aftermath of that happening, there was a sort of exchange going on which was starting to veer into the kind of, well, hang on, what went wrong here? And, kind of we made a mistake, but actually very quickly became, okay, what do we get from this? We learn from it because now we've learned something about a process that we've not tried before. We've learned something about how to navigate the kind of messaging that we're trying to do with the new brand that we'd set out. And we learned something about kind of internal processes as well around how we could kind of make sure that those things didn't happen in future. I think there's probably examples of where we didn't learn from mistakes as well. And I think some of that would be just because in those early days, especially, you're dealing with a lot of stuff. So there wasn't always the time to kind of take stock and reflect. But I think it kind of didn't matter so much because we had that kind of open, transparent culture that people kind of knew that they could speak out and say if something wasn't right.
And can you tell us about some specific examples of a culture of trust, of where you had freedom within guidelines?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a good example of what I was saying about it started off as a sort of principle and then became something we tried to codify. That kind of those early days of sort of post-merger dealing with the pandemic, we very much had this mindset of we've got to look after our people. They are the key to this. And so we did a lot of stuff. People were telling us, actually, my friends who work for other organisations are not getting this kind of treatment. I think people just reacted to that really positively, and it built the foundation of kind of, actually, this is an organisation that cares about me, wants the best for me. And that foundation we then kind of built upon through setting a new strategy, and kind of with the CEO who took over, we worked together to kind of make that a kind of intrinsic part. So we introduced some new values to the organisation, and those values were underpinned by a kind of framework of enablers and behaviours. So enablers that the organisation did to support, and behaviours that we wanted people to kind of follow. And we put the empowerment piece throughout that. It was one of the 5 values.
Okay.
Concept of freedom. We call it freedom within boundaries, but freedom.
Okay, that's fine.
As one of the key principles of it. And probably the best example I could give of where it worked really well was our project to launch the current website for the organisation. So to give you the sort of bit of context, we've got 2 old websites from 2 old charities around on old technology. And then we've got a 3rd website because we rebranded and relaunched ourselves with this kind of, so we had this kind of bridging site. So we've got quite a complicated situation, not ideal, content not in the right brand tone, all clinically safe, but kind of not really speaking. And so it felt a little bit like we had a slight personality disorder because you couldn't quite work out who you were navigating to. So there's a clear need to sort that out. Tech rationale for it, but mainly about what do people with lung conditions need from the charity. They need a website that's easy to navigate, a website that they can easily find us, all of these things. So the way we went about it was we seconded somebody into a role of product owner who was fantastic. She was absolutely brilliant. And we gave her the kind of framework of what we wanted. So certain principles about the website, clear budgets, timeline, things that we did or didn't want, anything that was completely certain bits of technology we wanted to avoid, and then gave her the freedom within those constraints, those guidelines, to go on and deliver the best that she could. And the result was brilliant. I mean, the website, I would say this because I was working there, but I think the website's brilliant. It's really easy to navigate. People love it. It was a better job than would have happened if we tried to kind of micromanage, if we'd sort of said, designed by a committee of senior people who think they're all sort of that wasn't the culture there. People were kind of, there wasn't ego. We just allowed her to kind of go for it. And I mean, it's quite staggering because we went live with that new website 2 weeks before going live with a brand new CRM system. I mean, most organizations wouldn't do both of those things at the same time, but we kind of, we were quite a courageous organization. I'm sure it still is a very courageous organization. And that wouldn't have been possible if I'd been trying to kind of manage those things in great detail, because I was sponsor for both projects. I would have ruined it. But actually giving her the freedom and trusting her meant we got a much better result, and we were able to do both those things.
I think she hadn't worked on any website before, had she?
Well, no. Her background was more in health advice, so she was more on the kind of content side. She wasn't a tech person. She'd had relevant experience through other jobs, but that wasn't her specialism. But we recognised her ability to kind of transfer her skills, and we saw her as someone who kind of actually could bring the beneficiary to mind because she had that experience. And I think the thing that was a lovely, wonderful surprise, because she was great at it and we hadn't even realised she would be, was on the relationship side, I mean, we had such a good client-customer relationship with the company that built them, partly because of the way she was able to handle it. I know that quite often people will moan about their suppliers, but sometimes we're not always the best clients. She made that really easy.
From that story, I actually really love the fact that you've read something like at Happy we say freedom within guidelines, but you've actually owned it and created that within boundaries, so making it yours. So the examples you've given there as well with the internet, we've got one ourselves, don't we, Henry?
Yes.
So now moving on, you're now working at Parkinson UK. And from what I heard is that they also brought you on because you have the happy culture.
There's quite a lot of overlap between kind of what Parkinson's UK needs to do and what I've just been doing at Asthma and Lung UK. Lots of similar kind of projects. And it's fair to say the experience I've just had, I was quite a good candidate for the job. I think that's probably why I was able to get the job. And it's a fantastic charity. I mean, it's a cause close to my heart. My grandfather had Parkinson's. It's one of these organisations that's kind of got a fantastic history. And it was quite energising. I was meeting all these people through the process and I was thinking, God, this is good. There's some really talented people here. They're all trying to get these things going, lots of modernisation, no resistance. But it felt like what they needed in my role was someone who could kind of take that forward, harness the best of that energy. And I thought, okay, this is where my principles are probably going to serve me well, because I think it's very much a similar approach that I need to take here. These are good people. If I can get the best out of them by following the same principles that served me well before, then hopefully I can kind of do here what I've done there. And I kind of ummed and ahed a bit about whether or not it was the right move. But as soon as I met everyone, I just thought, yes, this is where I need to be. This is good. And so far, so good. You know, it's early days. I've only been there 2 months, but I'm absolutely loving it. And one of the reasons I'm loving it is because I've got some really talented people who are kind of really sort of reacting well to some of the things that I'm trying to do, and how I can see the kind of opportunities and also the challenges that we're grappling with, you know, that are not dissimilar to any other charity, really. But it didn't take me long to start dropping the Happy Manifesto in. So.
What was the first thing?
I was in a meeting, I think, my first week, and there was discussion about a project that, you know, it was kind of whether it was on track. And someone had piped up and said, you know, the team are working really hard on this and we've got to make sure they kind of recognise it. So after the meeting, I kind of messaged a couple of people and said, I thought it was great for me because I was learning a bit about the culture of the organisation. I was learning about how we think here. Really impressed with some of the things I've seen. I was like, have you heard about the concept of celebrating mistakes? Here I am, kind of, you know, sharing a link to the Happy Manifesto, and then a sort of a few other people. I'm not trying to give the impression that there's all these mistakes going on. It was just, that's my hook. I was kind of, right, I'm gonna get in here. But a lot of what I've done before, kind of following these principles, I think applies again, because we've got lots of infrastructure things to sort out. It's not an unusual story, a charity that's done some great stuff going through a bit of a modernisation journey. And I'm really lucky because those who came before me have kind of left it in a good state. Some good stuff happened, lots of stuff already started. So it's a really good opportunity to kind of take the baton and run with it for the next bit. And whilst I don't know exactly what I'll do, I'll definitely carry on following the principles.
Excellent. So tell me about the principles. Apart from celebrating mistakes and trust and whatever, what other things did you do at Asthma and Lung UK, or will you do at Parkinson's?
There's quite a lot of stuff I say borrowed. I mean, I stole it from the Happy Manifesto. And it was no secret. I mean, there's many people at Asthma and Lung UK know I stole some of the content for the values framework. But, you know, another one that was particularly useful, which I think will always stay with me, is the idea of recruit for attitude and train for skill. So that became embedded in the framework that we used. We trained managers in that. And, you know, it's hard because you can't control what everyone thinks, but you give permission to people to do that. And the reason why I thought that was so relevant was because as a charity, their post-merger income about 15 million, number of staff was sort of between about 160, 180. So, you know, there are bigger players out there. So what do you do to differentiate yourself and kind of as an employer brand, get yourself out there and get ahead of maybe those bigger players? And one of the things I thought actually we could do was, if we deliberately had a policy of trying to attract hungry, talented people who wanted to progress, then we invest in them. We give them the frameworks to kind of really crack on and develop in their careers. We will get the best out of them, and they might move on. They might move on to somewhere else, and that's okay, because we will only get the best out of them while they're with us, and we've got so much to do that we want people who are doing that. And also, they'll go to these other organisations and they'll say, God, I had such a good time at Asthma and Lung UK. It's a great organisation. So they become your advocates, they're your kind of alumni network. And I can remember a few really good examples where this worked. I had a vacancy in one of my teams, and It had gone to a recruitment agent, and someone I've known years. He was sending candidates through, and the hiring manager had rejected a candidate because she said she didn't have enough management experience. So this consultant calls me up and he says, Ben, I know you're quite keen on this recruit for attitude thing. And so I said, yeah, okay. He said, well, I don't want to go round this person's back, but I sent a candidate and she's rejected her because she didn't think she had enough management experience. And I said, well, she doesn't need that because if she's got the right attitude and she's a people manager, that's fine.
Absolutely.
With the hiring manager. And I said, look, I know it's your call. You're the hiring manager. But I just wondered if you might rethink this, because this guy, I trust him, and he's telling me this candidate has got all the right attitude, everything. She kind of said, yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. Yeah, I should have given her time. She was hands down the best candidate. She's kind of someone who I'm sure is going to go far in her career, and she just needed that chance. Had that open mind of actually she said all the right things about how she interacts with people, how she would manage people, how she would lead. We thought, actually, we will train you, we will develop you to become a people manager. And I suppose there's an element of that kind of let good people who can manage as well. That was a really proud moment for me as well, because I didn't impose that. That was kind of, people knew that was something we were trying to do. And again, that is something that I will keep with me all the time, my approach to recruitment at least.
No, I love that. I do. That's a great story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not naming any names, of course, but
I want to know where this person is and how they're doing.
She's doing very well. I think she's still at the charity, and she's doing absolutely brilliantly from what I can pick up.
Excellently. So, Ben, what are your 3 top tips for a happy workplace?
I wish I could have more than 3. You've got 10, Henry, so that's harsh. But I do like the power of 3, so I'll go with it. I suppose my first one, I think, is probably inclusive culture. And the reason I say that is because I've got this kind of fundamental belief that people are their best selves when they're their true selves. It's not quite the same as bring your whole self to work, because, as much as I love my 3-year-old, I don't really want her to turn up every 5 minutes in a meeting. But actually, I'm happier because I feel I can be myself. I can wear these ridiculous shirts.
Yeah.
I'm autistic. I like kind of bright colours. I like quirky stuff. I can be me, and therefore I'm more productive. So I try and encourage that in the teams I lead, in all aspects of that word. I also think there's absolutely no point fussing about diversity if you don't have an inclusive culture to go with it, because otherwise you're not getting the best out of the kind of people you've got. And very much, that influenced a kind of approach of we want culture add, not culture fit, in the way we were recruiting people in my old job. My second principle, I guess, is probably, sounds like it's not necessarily going to lead to happiness, but trust me, it does. It's the idea that nothing worth doing is ever easy. The thing with that is that, sometimes taking on a lot of difficult stuff, you have to be brave. It can be difficult, it can be hard, but it's so rewarding because you then have a lot more impact. And I think that's something that's kind of served me well personally through going through quite a lot of change and volatility in my career, but also the teams that I've had as well, who I've been really fortunate to work with some really kind of brave people who are like, you know what, we're just going to roll our sleeves and do it. Yeah, we'll go live with a CRM and a website 2 weeks apart. Crazy, but we'll do it anyway. And I think the feeling you get after that, actually, you become so proud and happy of kind of what you've achieved. And I often, when I interview people, to sort of set at the start, when I kind of get into them, I don't say, give me all your career. I say, tell me the thing you're proudest of from your career to date. Because I think actually that tells you what really motivates them. And it helps them relax because they kind of feel like, yeah, I'm really happy and proud of that thing that I did. So that was number 2. I feel like I'm fitting more in to try and break your rule.
You're doing well.
The third one I would say is empowering people. It's so crucial because if you as a leader surround yourself with brilliant people and then kind of make it as easy as possible for them to do what they do well, you're going to get the best result.
You are.
I'm really fortunate to have great team, people who I've recruited, but people I've inherited as well, and kind of just get them together, get them ticking, get the best out of them. I don't know everything, and thankfully I don't know everything because I'd be interfering in everything if I did. My job is not to know everything. My job is to know enough to be able to make sense and to help people achieve what they're trying to do. And I think that empowerment has been with me right from the start. And I think reading the Happy Manifesto gave me some actual examples of how to do it.
Brilliant.
Excellent.
I love that. And so, Ben, before you leave us, as well as those 3 tips you've given us, I always love to ask, what gives you joy outside of work?
Outside of work?
Yes. Apart from your shirts, because I know they give you shirts.
Yeah, my shirts obviously give me a lot of joy. There's a whole collection. It's probably a bit of a cliche answer, but I'm going to say my family. I'm very proud of my family. My wife is the real brains behind the operation. She's about to start a PhD in the area of energy transition and decarbonisation, which is pretty cool. So she really is the brains behind the operation. And I've got 3 kids who are a handful and delightful all at the same time.
Aww.
I think the kind of joy I have of having a job that I can do and also have flexibility for a family life as well is just, it's kind of the perfect world for me.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Ben.
It's been a great discussion. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
So, Maureen, what was it like for you?
Oh my gosh. Wasn't he great?
Yeah, he was.
He's a total walking advert for the Happy Manifesto.
He is, isn't he?
And I've just got to say, even though he kept saying that, he stole the ideas, those ideas are there for the taking.
They are. Yes.
So where would they find it, Henry?
They will find it on the comments below the podcast. There's a free and electronic download on our website, or you can get it from any publisher, even Amazon.
Okay, so yeah, guys, go out, get the Happy Manifesto. So, it was such a great conversation, Henry. Lots of bits and pieces that really made me smile. And I think one of the main things that made me smile is when he spoke about that hiring for attitudes in terms of that one question there. It's like, tell me what you're most proudest of. And I think that's just a beautiful question to ask.
Yes.
And it's an example of empowerment. And again, it was one of the things he talked about, making sure that people feel empowered.
Yes. And I loved that thing where the individual didn't have the right management skills, but did have the attitude. And she's gone on to great things.
Yeah. Yeah. Who is she? We need to know.
And also, just getting out the way. Just, if you hire great people, get out the way and enable them to feel empowered.
Yeah. I mean, he says it all, Henry. The whole thing of that being your best self. It's like just to be able to be yourself, then you'll be more productive as well.
Absolutely. So I'm now doing a free workshop every week, apart from holidays.
Okay.
For 45 minutes every Wednesday, but based on 14 different sessions. One is trust, one is celebrate mistakes, so all sorts of things. Check it out in the comments below this podcast.
Brilliant. Yes, check it out. Don't forget to go to our website also, thehappymanifesto.com. Find out lots more about what we do and all the other podcasts that we've recorded as well. And what else, Henry?
Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and please put in a review.
That's it. And then just continue creating joyful workplaces.
Absolutely.